Hello, this is Real World Audio, and this video is about loudspeaker cabinet materials, what they are, and what is the role they play, what to look for when you are building loudspeakers, and here we go. So I think this is a nice thing to start with, that when you are building a loudspeaker cabinet, don't set up with the same goal as building a shed or a cupboard, but set up with the intention that you are building a music instrument, not something to put your shoes in, or a shed to store your tools, because that's the mentality that most loudspeaker cabinets are built with. Is just, take some pieces of wood and just put them together, without really thinking about their resonant properties and how they affect the sound. And you might say that that's not true, because cabinet makers for loudspeakers, they spend a lot of time thinking about things, and the answer to that is yes or no. Sure, they do, but they go on about with the same mentality as someone who is designing IKEA furniture, and they are just thinking about the load bearing and mechanical parameters. They are not thinking as luthiers, they are not thinking about what exactly happens when we are thinking about instruments. So first of all, let's look at particle boards, and you see that's something really nasty. It's basically chopped up wood, tiny little wood chips, and they are glued together and pressed down into a sheet. And this is not MDF, okay? This is something quite different. And I'm mentioning this because this was the main reason for the rise of the MDF. This is what many loudspeaker cabinets were made of in the 60s, 70s, even in the 80s and 90s. You could find cabinets, like the really cheap consumer stuff was made of these. And this is something truly nasty. And that's why a lot of cabinets speakers sound the way they sound, like a hollow, boomy, uncontrolled, lifeless, dull sound, and that's due to this material, this particle board. So basically, when we go for MDF, it's almost the same thing, but it's more refined. Those chips that it's made of, these guys, are much finer, and the glue that holds it together is way stronger, but the idea behind it is the same thing. And for both of them, the main feature for them is that they are cheap and easy to manufacture, and there is consistency. So basically, for particle boards, if you buy like 2000 sheets, all of them will look just about the same. MDF, you buy 2000 sheets, all of them will look the same. So both are perfect and only materials for a cheap loudspeaker cabinet, or maybe like a furniture, cheap furniture material that you can truly mass manufacture. And now let's see what this MDF material is made about. If you look at it under a microscope, it looks like a blanket. The surface of it, it's really fluffy. There are no long wood grains, there's no long fiber stretching across the board. It's just pieces of fibers all scratched up and glued together. So what is it really? Because it's not just wood, these are basically the components of MDF, which is abbreviation from medium density fiberboard. So it's treated wood chips where the fiber is coming from. There's some paraffin wax, and the other two ingredients that bind this together physically is basically uric acid. That's the main component in urine. That's why urine is called, because the main component of it is this uric acid, plus formaldehyde. So uric acid and formaldehyde. Formaldehyde, it's also known as embalming fluid. So embalming fluid and piss, that's the binding agent that binds together your nice fiberboard. Yeah, it's mildly carcinogenic, and it slowly evaporates out. So when you have lots of MDF around you, then it really it's evocative of those days that you will spend underground with the same smell, same chemicals leaching around you until you decompose. So let's go back to some more pleasant imagery. But maybe this is not so pleasant imagery either. So MDF is basically strong in one direction, and that's how it's made, and that you can drive a screw around it, and that was one main purpose on the creation of this easily mass manufacturable wood block, wood type, is that you can drill screws through it, and it will still hold its shape. However, that works only when you drill through this longitudinal plane of the board. When you want to drill across the board, so you see here the next board, it will tear apart. So it is strong only in one direction, but in other directions it's pretty weak, and it comes apart. So it's not something ultimate. And when you look at that video that I already linked in many times now about the world's second best speaker, there he talks about how strong MDF really is, and it's much weaker in tensile strength than plywood is, basically half as strong as plywood. So basically a 1-inch thick MDF is as strong as a half-inch thick plywood. So no, it's not really strong, it's really heavy, but it's easy to work with, although it really dulls your blades. But that's about all of the benefits that I can tell, and it will be a topic of the next video, how MDF contributes to the sound. But at this moment, let's just keep on comparing it. And now a next thing that's a really big step up from MDF is block board. On the surface it will look like plywood. You have to look at the side to be able to tell the difference between a blockboard and plywood, because when you look at it from the front, you will see the same kind of looks like some real wood, but that's just a single ply on top, and there are basically wooden blocks glued together, and then there's a ply on top, and then there's a ply on the bottom, and this is basically like a butcher's block with veneers on top, and you can also use this for cabinet material, and people use that, and also use the butcher's block, and it's a step up already from MDF. But because the elements blocks are just glued together, the fibers, they don't run along the whole board, they don't connect to each other, so the wide band resonance capability is not there yet, although there is a rigidity. So if you make a cabinet out of that, it will have a pretty strong base, but it will be a little bit lifeless because the top frequency will not be there too much. With MDF, because there are no long fibers running, it's not capable of resonating at low frequencies, and it's because of the lack of that fibrous structure, it will not respond to the internal pressures, and will not conduct them to the outside of the cabinet the same way. I will go into this a little bit in a minute or two, But so what that is about, but to understand that thing about what happens, like let's say this is the inside of the loudspeaker cabinet and that's your room, that's the outside. uh, there's something happening. So inside there's always a pressure change that depends on the frequency that the driver is making. So your loudspeaker driver is producing music, and as the driver cone moves, then on the inside there will be those pressure fluctuations inside your cabinet, and this MDF is unable to transmit those pressure fluctuations to the outside, to the air in your room. And however, there's no such thing as an inert cabinet. Everything that is capable of resonance, that is a hard material, does resonate, and there's nothing you can do about it. However, what is very critical for every material is what is the resonance pattern, how a certain material can and does resonate. And this type of material, the MDF, it's unable to follow what's going on inside the cabinet, and it will just be able to transmit the energy that's on the inside of cabinet to the outside world only in a really limited frequency bandwidth. But it will be a limited and a smear, and that's why it will add that nasty sound coloration, because it's transmitting in the same frequency range no matter what's going on the inside of the cabinet. And that's why MDF is a really bad choice for cabinet material. And even if you doesn't matter if you build a cabinet that's inert or alive, MDF is a bad choice. So even if you want a cabinet that's an inert cabinet, just do a favor for yourself and avoid MDF at all costs, because plywood is much stronger and it will resonate much less than MDF, and when it resonates, it will give you a wide band resonance that is correlated to the music signal that's happening, instead of an alien bad smear to the sound. So let's now go through and step up to plywood. And now this is an example for really low grade plywood, like construction grade. This is something that can help you to hold the concrete in place until it dries, but you should never ever use it to build a loudspeaker. If you do, it will have a really nasty sound to it. And when people want to sell you loudspeakers made of MDF, they when they talk about plywood, they are thinking about this kind of plywood, and they will evoke the imagery of unsuspecting customers of this low quality stuff. But this is something that should be truly avoided, and it should never be used for loudspeaker material. Why? One reason. So one reason is because, as you see, there is no structure. That they are using wood that grows very fast, and there's no tensile strength. So you see, and it's not cut on in that plane that would give stability and rigidity to the surface. So basically, it is unable to conduct the resonances that occur inside of the cabinet to the outer world with precision. They just start warping on their own and doing their own dance and coloring the sound. And one reason is because there's lack of grain structure for the individual plies, and the second reason is because this construction grade material is glued together very poorly. They use only very mild pressure to pressure the layers together, and they are using very poor quality layers. So you see the layers are coming apart, there's a lot of air in between, and the individual layers are not single pieces of plies but multiple pieces of wood just put together. and whenever you have these cavities there, that when it starts to resonate, those cavities are resonating, and you have like the 5, 10, 20 kilohertz range. That's where the air columns, those tiny little air pockets, will vibrate and resonate at those frequencies, and just totally mess up the imaging and sound staging of the cabinet. Also because it's the layers are not held fast together, they are not strong, the low frequency energy is going to get lost because the layer just compresses and then they expand. So the cabinet is unable to transmit low frequency energy, and it will have excessive resonances at very high frequencies. And this is another reason why plywood has a really bad name, or they are trying to make a really bad name for plywood. But this is not a loudspeaker cabinet grade plywood. This is something that you would use in a construction, and not even in a cabinet that you make furniture of. So this is not even furniture grade. So this is also very poor grade stuff. So if they want to sell you MDF using this as a reason, do not believe it, because we are not making, nobody is making loudspeakers in their right mind out of this material. Even if there's like nicer grade plywood, now this is much nicer. You can see here that the layers are very uniform. They are glued together properly, it's pressed properly, but it might have areas which are collapsed. So you see that there are the individual ply here is missing a piece. Each of them has a couple little bit missing pieces, and then as it's pressed together, the whole thing has just collapsed. And this is something to look for, and you should avoid those panels where you find pockets like that. And this is why building loudspeakers out of plywood is not a no-brainer thing that you just randomly buy 2 sheets of plywood and you are done. No, you have to inspect each and every single sheet of plywood and look at the edges, and if you see things like this, then that's a no, you are not buying that sheet. And yes, it can take sometimes a long time, and you might have to look through several hardware stores, or it might take months until you find plywood that will be suitable for your loudspeaker cabinet. But I really insist that you insist on this process and do not get stuff like that, because that's going to bring down the sound quality. And here now you see this is like a good, nice, acceptable quality in the bottom. Here now we have some uneven layers with little tiny air pockets. If you have a few of this, maybe 1 or 2 on each side, but the rest looks like that, it's still okay. And here we have more of those, and now there's a big chip there. Try to avoid that. Same thing here. And that's why it's, as I said, individual inspection of every sheet is critical when you are building of plywood. And always inspect the edges, inspect also the cuts that you made from the plywood. And when you see that there's like 1 or 2 on the side, you can extrapolate that there's a few more on the inside of that sheet as well. But if you find very few on the outside, that's also an indication that there's probably not much happening inside. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we will continue from here. Bye bye.